Hello, my name is Philippe Girard, a professor in the history department at McNeese State University.
And I'm Taylor Ellender. I'm from the history department at McNeese. Welcome to Your Grandma Rocks, where we explore the lives of famous women in history.
Welcome and bienvenue à nos amis francophones. Vous écoutez la radio de l'Université McNeese.
On the program today, music and history as we retrace the life of a remarkable young woman. She didn't live a long life, sadly, but her legacy still inspires people today.
She became famous because of her diary, which nearly everyone has read.
She is also one of the most recognizable figures of the Holocaust.
As you can probably guess by now, this young lady's name is
Anne Frank.
Along the way, we will feature music by Jewish musicians from a variety of countries. For our first songs, we'll be listening to Vienna by Billy Joel.
Slow down, you crazy child. You're so ambitious for a juvenile. But then if you're so smart, tell me, why are you still so afraid? Where's the fire? What's the hurry about? You better cool it off before you burn it out. You got so much to do and only so many hours in a day. Hey, but you know that when the truth is told, that you can get what you want or you can just get old. You're gonna kick off before you even get halfway through. Ooh, when will you realize Vienna waits for you? Slow down, you're doing fine. You can't be everything you wanna be before your time. Although it's so romantic on the borderline tonight. Too bad, but it's the life you lead. You're so ahead of yourself that you forgot what you need. Though you could see when you're wrong, you know you can't always see when you're right. You're right. You got your passion, you got your pride, but don't you know that only fools are satisfied? Dream on, but don't imagine they'll all come true. Ooh, when will you realize Vienna waits for you? Child, and take the phone off the hook and disappear for a while. It's alright, you can't afford to lose a day or two. Ooh, when will you realize Vienna waits for you?
Bonjour and welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks. We just listened to Vienna by Billy Joel. Je m'appelle Philippe Girard.
And I'm Taylor Ellender. Today, we're exploring the life of Anne Frank, arguably the most famous victim of the Holocaust.
In a way, I feel I know her intimately because I've read her private diary. But then I don't know that much about her prior to the time that she spent in that attic in Amsterdam. So you will have to fill me in on the details. So where does the story start for our young diarist?
Well, Anneliese Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany.
So she was German-born? I always thought she was Dutch.
Originally, she was born in Germany. However, she and her family weren't there for long. In 1933, Hitler's Nazi Party rose to power in Germany. As a result, Anne, her sister Margot, and her mother Edith all fled Germany.
They were smart to get out when they did. Not to belabor the obvious, but the Nazi Party platform was extremely anti-Semitic.
Thankfully, the Frank family was able to recognize the danger they were in from the start and got out while they could.
It seems strange today, but not everyone realized how dangerous Hitler was back in the 30s. Many Jews in Germany hoped that Hitler would be simply the garden variety anti-Semite, and there would be ways to lie low and survive his rule. Meanwhile, rulers in France and Britain, they also saw that Hitler was just a standard German nationalist and it would be possible to quote-unquote appease him. Obviously, they were all wrong. So where did the Frank family go?
Well, Anne's father, Otto, found a job in Amsterdam in 1934. When he was able to secure a place to live, he sent for his wife and daughters.
I'm sure that having to move to a different country at such a young age, that must have been difficult.
I can imagine so. Even moving to a different school when I was a kid was tough. Can you imagine having to move because you're not welcome in your own home country?
Well, I changed schools quite often as a kid, but at least I didn't have to learn a whole other language like she did, from German to Dutch. But that's the kind of ordeal that many refugees face even today. And typically they're not welcome in their country of origin and their country of destination, which was also true of Jews like Anne Frank in the 1930s. So how old was Anne Frank when she arrived in Amsterdam?
She was only 6 years old.
Did she go to school?
Of course, the Franks were huge on education. Both Anne and Margot went to school and were quite gifted as well.
I assume that Anne must have been a great writer?
You'd be correct. Anne demonstrated a gift for reading and writing from an early age. She was also very guarded when it came to sharing her work. She often hid her writing from her friends and family.
That's pretty ironic, considering that the diary of Anne Frank ended up being read by millions of people worldwide.
Yeah, I'm sure that she would be very embarrassed if she knew.
Now I feel bad, as if I was peeking into her secrets and learning about that boy that she was secretly attracted to.
Well, she's been dead for 75 years, so at some point concerns about privacy become less important.
I know, as historians we often read the private letters of people from the past, but still it feels almost voyeuristic in her case.
I get your point. But that's the only way to get a unique, very personal perspective on the Holocaust. Otherwise, what are we going to use as a source? Hitler? Goebbels? We need some balance.
You're right, I guess. But let's get back to the narrative. So the Franks escaped persecution in Germany. They settled down in Amsterdam. And so things seem to be going well for a while, right?
Unfortunately, that didn't last. The Nazis invaded the Netherlands in May of 1940, and life changed for them yet again.
Talk about being haunted by your enemies. They uprooted the whole family to another country to be left alone. And now the Nazis invaded that country too. So what did you do? Were they able to escape again?
I'll get to that in a second. But first, a song. Here's Hurricane by Robert Zimmerman, better known as Bob Dylan.
Side note, it's kind of sad that many Jewish entertainers, from Bob Dylan to Kirk Douglas, had to change their identity to reach a broader audience under an Anglo name. Obviously, that kind of subtle anti-Semitism in America can be compared to what Anne Frank endured in Europe, but still.
That's a great topic of discussion, but for another day. We have a lot on our plate today.
All right, back on track then. Here's Bob Dylan.
Shots rang out in a barroom night. Every pan of Valentine from the upper hall sees a bartender lying in a pool of blood. Cries out, my God, they've killed them all. Here comes the story of the hurricane. The man the authorities came to blame for something that he never done. Put in a prison cell for one time he could have been the champion of the world. Three bodies lying there as bad as sea, and another man named Bella moving around mysteriously. I didn't do it, he says, and he holds up his hands. I was only rubbing the register, I hope you understand. I saw him leaving, he says, and he stops. One of us had better call up the cops. And so Patty calls the cops, and they arrive on the scene with their red lights flashing in a hot New Jersey night. Meanwhile, far away in another part of town, Reuben Carter and some friends out driving around. The number one contender for the middleweight crown had no idea what kind of shit was about to go down. When the cops pulled him over to the side of the road, just like the time before and time before that. In Patterson, that's just the way things go. If you're black, you might as well not show up on the street unless you wanna drive ahead. Remember the murder that you happened in a bar. Remember you said you saw
Welcome back. I'm Taylor Ellender, co-host of Your Grandma Rocks, your favorite women's history show on KBYS.
Et je suis Philippe Girard. Vous écoutez la radio de l'Université McNeese. We just listened to Bob Dylan.
For those of you who are just tuning in, we're covering the life of the Jewish diarist Anne Frank.
We stopped right around the German invasion of the Netherlands in 1940. So how did the Franks handle this new development?
It was clear that the Franks would not be safe under a Nazi occupation. As a result, Anne's parents decided that they would go into hiding.
Well, another option would have been to move to another country yet again, but visas were hard to come by for Jewish refugees in Europe at the time. So where did they hide?
They chose the workplace of Anne Frank's father, which was a 3-story space above the offices.
Oh, that's right. They stayed on the upper floors of the building, and the entrance was blocked by a bookcase. I remember that from the diary.
Their hiding place was known as the secret annex in English, and in Dutch, some complicated word I can't pronounce.
Can't help you there. I'm terrible with Dutch. So, did they have any help?
Of course. A couple of her father's co-workers knew they were hiding in the building, and they provided them with supplies almost daily. They also kept the Franks informed on war news as well as political developments.
Well, their friends were taking a huge risk by helping them. The penalty for sheltering Jews during wartime, that was death.
Exactly. In order to protect themselves and the people helping them, the Franks were very thorough in covering their tracks.
So how were they able to do that?
Otto made a complete mess of their house, trying to make it look like they left in a hurry. He also left a note about possibly escaping to Switzerland.
So that the Germans thought that they had left the country altogether. Very smart.
Little did they know that the Franks were hiding right under their noses.
Well, that kind of story happened all over Europe. In France, some Catholic schools, they hosted Jewish children by giving them fake baptism certificates. On that topic, I would recommend watching the movie Au revoir les enfants, or Goodbye Children in English, which is a very touching story of friendship between two boys at the time, one of whom was a Jewish boy in hiding.
I'll put that on my Netflix list.
Well, fair warning, that doesn't end well either, and it was also based on a true story. But anyway, were the Franks the only ones hiding in that secret annex?
They were alone for a week before they were joined by the Van Pels family.
And then months later, as I recall, by Fritz Pfeffer, who was a family friend. So what did Anne think about her new roommates?
As you can imagine, she was really happy to have new people to talk to. However, she grew tired of their company quickly.
Well, I can't imagine being trapped in a confined space with the same people for that long. You know what Ben Franklin said about house guests and fish. They're fun at first, and then they start to stink after a few days.
They didn't have much choice, I'm afraid. Anne Frank wrote about her roommates a lot in her diary. She shared a room with Fritz and grew to dislike him a lot. She also found the Van Pels to be selfish, especially with the amount of food they took.
Well, nowadays in the US, we're so used to having food in abundance that the issue of having enough food to share, that doesn't cross our mind.
Well, there are poor people in the U.S. who struggle to feed themselves. But you're right, most people today are more concerned about getting too fat than going hungry.
But in the 1940s, rationing, that was the norm all over Europe. I met a lot of people from my grandparents' generation when I was a kid, and that was their main memory of World War II, just being hungry all the time.
Well, Anne Frank had a great relationship with her family, which helped a lot. She also grew to be good friends with many of the people helping them.
Well, that's the thing about war. It brings out the best and the worst in people. When it comes to the Holocaust, some people took incredible risks to help complete strangers just because it was the right thing to do. And then others denounced Jews to the Nazis for money or for spite or simply because they shared the Nazi agenda.
Right. Let's take a short break and listen to It's Too Late by Carole King.
And it's too late, baby, now it's too late. Though we really did try to make it. Something inside has died and I can't hide and I just can't fake it. Oh, no, no. It used to be so easy living here with you. You were light and breezy and I knew just what to do. Now you look so unhappy and I feel like a fool. And it's too late, baby, now it's too late. Though we really did
Bonjour à tous and welcome back to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. This was It's Too Late by Carole King. Je suis Philippe Girard.
And I'm Talon Ellender. Today we're covering the life of Anne Frank, the Jewish diarist. Before our break, we got to the most famous period in her life, when she hid in an annex in Amsterdam during the Nazi occupation of Holland in World War II.
Before the break, you mentioned that she had a great relationship with her family, right?
For the most part, yes. Anne always had a great relationship with her father.
Dads often have that special bond with a little girl. I can attest to that.
He was always there to act as emotional support. Anne frequently suffered from mood swings, so his support was always helpful.
Well, how about her sister then?
That's a little more complicated. Anne and Margot didn't have a close relationship before they went into hiding. In fact, they fought quite often.
That seems like normal behavior between siblings. I mean, I can also attest to that.
Anne often expressed jealousy towards her sister in her diary. She felt as if she was unfairly compared to Margot.
Well, I hope that works things out. When you're being hounded by the Nazis, bickering isn't the best option. Your family is about the only thing you can fall back on. And not to be morbid, but the Franks could be killed at any moment. Do you really want your last conversation with your sister to be a silly fight? Obviously, I can't compare my life to Anne Frank's, but that's the way I try to live every day. Making sure that if I go unexpectedly, I don't leave any bad memories behind.
Which is why you should always give your students an A.
I wouldn't go that far. So how did Anne Frank and her sister, how did they do?
Well, the fact that they were locked in an attic for 2 years definitely helped. They became much closer and were able to confide in each other as Anne matured.
What about her mother? Did they get along?
Actually, Anne had a difficult relationship with her mother. In her diary, Anne criticized her mother rather harshly.
Again, pretty common family dynamic. It's the female version of the Oedipal complex. Girls love their dad and they hate their mom. That usually passes with time.
It did. As Anne matured, she realized that their differences were as much her fault as her mother's. She also expressed regret for her harsh comments about her mom.
Very mature of her.
When you live in the same room as someone for years, you can bet that your relationship will evolve quite a bit.
So how long were they able to hold out in the end?
Their stay in the annex ended after 2 years. Before I get into that though, how about some more music?
Great idea. We're about to cover some rather dark material, so it's good to take a breather. What are we listening to this time?
Well, we're going to listen to Again by Lenny Kravitz.
I've been searching for you. I heard a cry within my soul. I never had a yearning quite like this before. Now you are walking right through my door. All of my life, where have you been? I wonder if I'll ever see you again. And if that day comes, I know we could win. I wonder if I'll ever see you again. A sacred gift of heaven, for better, worse, wherever. And I would never let somebody break it down or take your crown. Never. All of my life, where have you been? I wonder if I'll ever see you again. And if that day comes, I know we could win. I wonder if I'll ever see you again. Through time, I've always known that you were there upon your throne, a lonely queen without her king. I longed for.
This was Again by Lenny Kravitz. You're listening to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS. I'm Talon Ellender.
Et je suis Philippe Girard. Today we are retracing the life of Anne Frank, the German-born Jewish girl best known for the years she spent hiding in an attic in Amsterdam during World War II.
Before the break, I mentioned that the Frank family's stay in the annex came to a sudden end.
That's right, and we all knew this was coming, unfortunately. You can only spend so much time tiptoeing in an attic while people work one floor below before someone notices something. And that's what makes Anne Frank's story so special. By getting to know her intimately through her diary, it makes the end of her life even more tragic. She's not just a number, one of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust. She's almost a friend. Walk us through the end of her story.
Well, on the morning of August 4th, 1944, the German police stormed their little sanctuary and arrested the inhabitants.
Obviously, the big question is, how did the Nazis find them?
Actually, no one is sure about who the source that tipped off the Germans was, or whether it was a betrayal at all.
There was an article in the New York Times a few months ago about the same topic. I think the curators at the Anne Frank Museum are still researching who betrayed Anne Frank, which also reminds me of another show we did for KBYS about a French resistance fighter named Lucie Aubrac, because her boss, Jean Moulin, was a leader of the French resistance, and he was also arrested by the Gestapo, and to this day, people are still also arguing over who the mole was. Anyway, so where were the Franks taken after their arrest?
They were detained in many locations in the following months, but they eventually made their way to Auschwitz concentration camp on September 3rd, 1944.
Auschwitz, the most infamous work camp and death camp of the Holocaust. I think we can all picture what happened there. We all have those images from Schindler's List branded in our brain. In a way, the girl with a red coat in the movie by Spielberg, that is Anne Frank.
One of the most enduring images in the movie is when the train reaches the camp. That's what happened to the Franks too. The SS immediately got to work separating the men and women. As a result, Otto Frank was taken away from his wife and daughters.
Did he ever see them again?
Unfortunately not. He was put on work detail soon after.
Well, what about Anne and Margot, her sister, and her mother?
They started to work as well. However, the conditions at the camp were poor. There was very little food, and it was ridden with disease.
So how did Anne Frank fare in this environment? I mean, she was already a fighter who had learned to survive in the annex.
Anne was a strong girl. However, it wasn't enough to protect her from the horrible conditions of the camp. She and her sister were both extremely ill.
Never a good sign. People too sick to work were often sent to death camps. So what about her mother?
She stopped eating altogether because she gave all the food she had to her daughters.
Wow, what a loving mother. That puts all these silly tensions in the annex in perspective. But ultimately, family, that's the only thing that matters when things get tough. What happened to Anne and Margot?
They were relocated to Bergen-Belsen in October 1944.
Bergen-Belsen, another infamous camp.
That camp was rampant with typhus. Unfortunately, both Margot and Anne succumbed to illness in early 1945.
I knew the end of the story, but that doesn't make it any better. Especially when you know that the war ended just a few months later in May of 1945. If only she had been able to hang on just a little bit longer.
I know, even if her end was tragic, her life has continued to inspire to this day. We'll finish on that more inspiring note, but first, one last song.
Coming up next, we have The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light. It split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never shared. No one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fools say you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed the wells of silence.
Bienvenue à tous, je m'appelle Philippe Girard. This was The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel.
And I'm Taylin Ellender. You're listening to Your Grandma Rocks on KBYS, a show about famous women from centuries past. Today we retrace the life of Anne Frank, the Jewish girl best known for the diary she wrote while hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam.
We left off on a tragic moment when she was separated from her father in Auschwitz and then sent to the camp of Bergen-Belsen.
Unfortunately, Anne wasn't able to survive her ordeal. However, she was left quite a legacy that still inspires people today.
You mean her diary?
That's right. After the Franks were taken, one of their friends found and saved Anne's diary and hoped that she could return it to her someday.
That's a kind thought. Often when you lose loved ones, you hang on to mementos, little things that keep them alive. But since Anne never returned, what did the friend do with the diary?
Amazingly, Anne's father, Otto, survived his time in the camp. He returned home after the end of the war.
So did he know what happened to his family?
No, he had no way of knowing. He tried to locate them as soon as he returned, but he eventually learned that they had passed.
Again, as a father, I cannot imagine what he must have gone through, losing his wife and his daughters like this. So what about the diary then?
The friend gave the diary to Otto. After reading it, it gave him a new perspective on his daughter. He was moved by her dreams to become an author, and he decided to try and have it published.
Smart idea. After an event like the Holocaust, you cannot bring loved ones back from the dead, but you can keep their memory alive. It's an act of tribute, of remembrance, but also a way to make sure that other people don't forget either. That seems incredible, but you still have revisionists today who claim that the Holocaust never took place. So the diary of Anne Frank, that is yet another piece of evidence to set the record straight. I'm sure it was published right away, right?
Actually, it wasn't. The dad's first attempts to have it published failed. It wasn't until 1947 that Anne Frank's dad was finally successful.
Wow. And so what made Anne Frank's diary stand apart from the other accounts from the time about the Holocaust?
It was extremely well written. It was obvious that Anne had a gift for writing. But the thing that makes it stand out is the fact that it was so personal and relatable.
That's right. The diary touches on things that anyone could relate to. I first read the diary when I was a kid, and even though she was from a different time and country and religion and sex, I could relate to her.
Exactly. Plus, she gave a face to a terrible tragedy. Her fate was shared by 6 million other individuals, so it's easy to think of them as a group, as a pile of bodies shoveled by a bulldozer into a mass grave.
Or even as a non-existent people. Many of the bodies were burnt. They literally vanished into thin air.
Right. Anne's story was one we could all empathize with, and as a result, it brought awareness to one of the most horrible events in human history.
Bearing witness, making sure that the world never forgets. That was not her intention originally, but she did it anyway. She really was a remarkable young woman.
What a life. We're glad we could share it with you.
Quelle vie incroyable, en effet.